Serial murder is not a recent phenomenon. At least one known serial murderer was killing at a prolific rate as early as the 15th century. This list will recount some of their horrifying quotes, as well as their heinous crimes. Viewer discretion is advised. Gilles de Rais was a French noble born to a wealthy family in the year 1404. Early on in his life, he made a name for himself as a skilled fighter. He was promoted to a companion at arms of the famous Joan of Arc. It is reported that he even saved her life. For his valor on the battlefield, Gilles was given an estate and vast amounts of land. After the capture and execution of Joan of Arc, he retired to his estate. It is here that he would commit his atrocities. He is estimated to have tortured, mutilated, violated, and ultimately killed up to 200 children over a span of 8 years. He confessed to these acts at his trial, and as a result, was put to death in the year 1440. Peter Stubb was a German farmer living near the small country town of Bedburg. Not much is known about Peter outside of the exploits of his trial. What is known from his trial is that Peter believed himself to be a werewolf. He claimed that the devil had given him a magic belt that gave him the ability to transform into a werewolf. Stubb was ultimately responsible for the gruesome deaths and cannibalizations of at least 17 women and children. He was executed for his crimes on October 31st, 1589. Elizabeth Bathory was a Hungarian noblewoman with familial ties to the King of Poland and the Prince of Transylvania. Her family was very wealthy, and she lived a lavish lifestyle with many servants. She lives forever in infamy as the most prolific female serial killer in history. She is reported to have potentially killed up to 650 people. There is a legend that suggests she reveled in the pain of her victims and would bathe in their blood, as she believed it was the secret to youthful skin rejuvenation. Because of her family's wealth and influence, she did not face trial when these actions were revealed. Rather, in 1611, she was locked up and walled into her room, with only a small port for food. Here she would remain until her death in 1614. The Harp Brothers were born to Scottish immigrant parents in North Carolina. They are believed to be America's first historically documented serial killers. Big Micajah Harp was the elder brother, and little Wiley Harp was the younger. In some accounts, they are believed to be cousins, by the names of Joshua and William Harper. In any case, these two individuals were responsible for some of the most horrifying murders, including Micajah's murder of his own infant daughter because he was annoyed by her constant crying. The killing spree began sometime in 1797 and ended with Micajah's death in 1799 at the hands of a vengeful posse. Wiley was eventually captured and hanged in 1803, marking the end of America's first serial killers. Very little is known about Jack the Ripper. Many today still speculate about individuals who may have been the killer. Nevertheless, his identity remains a mystery. What is known is that the killer was responsible for at least 5 gruesome murders in and around London in the Whitechapel district in the year 1888. On August 31st, the body of Marianne Nichols was discovered after having been horribly mutilated. 4 more bodies would be discovered similarly mutilated, with the final body being discovered on November 9th. During this time, It is believed that at least a few of the mocking letters received by authorities and newspapers were from the real killer, as they contained intimate knowledge and details of the murders. Although the police had identified several possible suspects, ultimately, no one was ever charged with the crimes, and the murders would go unsolved to this day. Albert Fish was born on May 19, 1870, in Washington, D.C. He was the youngest child in his family, with 3 other living siblings. Fish came from a family with a history of mental illness. He spent 5 years in an orphanage after the death of his father. Here, he reportedly suffered much abuse. At age 12, he began his first homosexual relationship with another boy. He also began engaging in disturbing acts, including voyeurism. After an extensive lifetime of criminal acts, both minor and serious, Fish escalated his violent tendencies in 1919, 2 years after his wife left him to raise their children alone. It is unknown exactly how many victims Fish had. Perhaps his most famous victim was Grace Budd. Fish deceived the Budd family with the intent to kill their 2 sons. However, he changed his mind once he saw young Grace. Under the pretense of taking Grace to his niece's birthday party, he walked out with her, and her family would never see her again. Fish confessed to this in a mocking letter he sent to the family, describing how he killed and ate young Grace. Unbeknownst to Fish, this letter would lead to his capture. His trial began on March 11, 1935. He was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. His sentence was carried out on January 16, 1936. Albert DeSalvo was born to a dysfunctional family on September 3, 1931. His father was an abusive alcoholic who would often abuse his mother. From an early age, DeSalvo had run-ins with the law. Most often, he was caught in the act of being a peeping Tom. He joined the army, but he was discharged as a result of failing to obey his orders. He married a young German girl after his discharge. From June 1962 to January of 1964, the Strangler would claim 13 victims in Boston. The victims were often older women, the oldest victim being 85. Some, however, were young, with the youngest being 21. As the police scrambled to find any leads, DeSalvo was arrested for tying up and molesting a woman while holding a knife to her throat. Once DeSalvo was identified for the crime in a police lineup, he began to confess to many crimes, including being the Boston Strangler. However, at first the police did not believe him, as he had a reputation for being a braggart. Nevertheless, DeSalvo was arrested for the other crimes and was sent off to a hospital to be assessed by psychiatrists. The attorney assigned to DeSalvo interviewed him, and after DeSalvo described the murders down to the smallest detail, his attorney was convinced that DeSalvo really was the killer. Unfortunately, we may never know, as DeSalvo was killed while in prison in 1973. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946. Bundy came into the world as an illegitimate child, conceived outside of wedlock. Bundy was raised as the adopted child of his grandparents in order to hide this apparent blemish on the family's reputation. At an early age, Bundy began to display disturbing behavior, such as voyeurism and theft. By all accounts, Bundy was raised in a normal family. In 1972, he graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in psychology. Bundy had a short fling with a wealthy woman in California while he was still in university. However, the relationship would ultimately fail. Although unknown, it is generally believed that Bundy began killing in 1974. Women went missing in the Seattle area around this time under eerily similar circumstances. Bundy would later reveal that he would pretend to be injured and in need of help to lure his victims into his car. Bundy evaded capture several times, either through charm or cunning. After his second prison escape in 1977, Bundy made his way across the country to Tallahassee, Florida. He proceeded to break into a sorority house, where he assaulted 4 women, killing 2 of them on the night of January 14th, 1978. His final murder occurred on February 9th, when he kidnapped and killed Kimberly Leach, who was only 12 years old. Bundy was soon apprehended and charged with the crimes. After a series of trials, Bundy was sentenced to death 3 separate times. Bundy appealed his sentences, but was ultimately put to death on January 24th, 1989. Thank you for taking the time to watch my video. If you enjoyed the content, please leave a like and subscribe to my channel. I hope to be able to put out new content every week, and with this simple gesture on the platform, your support can go a long way towards making it a reality. Thank you again for your time, and remember, even a little light pierces much darkness.